In 476 AD, a Germanic chieftain named Odoacer deposed the last Roman emperor, a teenage boy named Romulus Augustulus. That is the date historians put in textbooks as the fall of the Western Roman Empire. But by 476 AD, the Roman economy had already been functionally destroyed for at least 2 centuries. The barbarians did not collapse Rome. Rome collapsed Rome. The barbarians just showed up at the end to take inventory. The actual story of how Rome fell is a story about currency debasement, supply chain failure, a military budget that consumed everything, a tax system that caused the people it taxed to flee, and a series of emperors who kept choosing the same short-term solution to a long-term structural problem until the solution became the problem. It is one of the most detailed case studies in economic collapse that exists. And it maps onto things happening right now in a way that is genuinely uncomfortable if you look at it closely. Let's start from the beginning. At its height, Rome was the largest and most sophisticated economy in the ancient world. The road network alone covered over 250,000 miles, connecting every province of the empire to every other province and allowing goods, soldiers, and information to move at speeds that would not be matched in Europe for over 1,000 years. The trade network stretched from Britain to the Persian Gulf. Roman merchants traded directly with India, exchanging silver coins for spices, silk, and luxury goods. The grain supply was managed through a sophisticated logistics system that kept the population of Rome, which at its peak reached over 1 million people, fed year-round from farms across North Africa, Egypt, and the Mediterranean coast. Rome had public welfare, public baths, public entertainment, roads, bridges, and aqueducts that constituted the most advanced infrastructure on Earth. All of it required money. The original source of that money was conquest. Every time Rome defeated a new enemy, it absorbed their territory, their population, their mines, their agricultural output, and their accumulated wealth. Conquest funded the Roman state. When expansion stopped, the funding model broke. Augustus Caesar, the first emperor, slowed the pace of Roman expansion in the 1st century BCE. He made a strategic decision that the empire was large enough to be difficult to defend, and that adding more territory would create more frontier to protect without proportional gains in revenue. He was right about the security analysis. The economic consequence was that the flow of new wealth into the Roman treasury slowed significantly. But spending did not slow with it. The military still needed to be paid. The bureaucracy still needed to be paid. The public works programs still needed funding. The emperors who followed Augustus still needed to fund their building projects and their popularity. The gap between revenue and expenditure started to open. For the first 2 centuries of the empire, Rome managed this gap reasonably well through a combination of taxation, trade revenue, and careful monetary management. The denarius, Rome's primary silver coin, held relatively stable value. At the height of the early empire, it contained about 4.5 grams of pure silver. It was trusted across the known world as a stable store of value. Then the crisis of the 3rd century hit. Between 235 and 284 AD, Rome cycled through approximately 50 different emperors in 49 years. Most of them were generals who seized power by force and held it until someone else seized it from them. Every new emperor needed to pay the soldiers who had put him in power. Every transition of power required military campaigns that depleted the treasury. The frontiers of the empire came under sustained attack from multiple directions simultaneously, the Germanic tribes in the north and the Sassanid Persians in the east, requiring enormous military expenditure at exactly the moment when political chaos was making it impossible to manage finances coherently. By the middle of the 3rd century, the army was consuming approximately 70% of the entire Roman budget. 500,000 soldiers on the payroll. The mines were running low on silver. Tax revenue from provinces being actively invaded was collapsing. And the emperors found the solution that always looks like a solution in the short term and never is in the long term. They debased the currency. The process worked like this. The imperial mint would collect existing silver coins, melt them down, mix in increasing amounts of cheaper metals like copper or bronze, and recast them as new coins of the same nominal denomination but lower actual silver content. More coins for the same amount of silver. The emperor could pay more soldiers with the same supply of raw material. In the short term it worked. In the slightly less short term it destroyed everything. Nero began the debasement process around 64 AD, reducing the silver content of the denarius to about 90% and slightly reducing its weight. It was modest and the economy absorbed it without obvious crisis. His successors continued the process. By 200 AD the denarius was down to about 50% silver. By 265 AD it contained approximately 0.5% silver. That is not a rounding error. The coin that had been 90% silver 2 centuries earlier was now 0.5% silver. It was essentially a bronze coin with a trace of silver dusting. And prices reflected it. By 265 AD, when there was only 0.5% silver left in a denarius, prices skyrocketed 1,000% across the Roman Empire. 1,000%. The most basic goods became unaffordable for ordinary Romans on fixed incomes. Soldiers, who were paid in denarii, found their wages worth less with every passing year. Soldiers demanded far higher wages as the quality of coins diminished. Caracalla, who raised soldiers' pay by 50% near 210 AD, was quoted as saying, "Nobody should have any money but I, so that I may bestow it upon the soldiers." That quote is one of the most perfectly encapsulated descriptions of a monetary death spiral in historical record. The emperor is acknowledging that his solution to paying soldiers is to extract wealth from everyone else. And the soldiers need more pay precisely because the currency he is paying them with is worth less every time he prints more of it. The people who suffered most were the ones without assets. Wealthy Romans with land, with gold reserves, with agricultural estates had stores of real value that inflation could not easily destroy. Poor Romans with wages and cash savings watched those savings become worthless. The wealthy fled to the countryside and set up independent fiefdoms, taking their tax revenue with them. The tax base contracted as the people most able to pay found ways to avoid paying. The state responded by raising taxes on the people who remained, which drove more of them to leave. The loop closed on itself and every iteration made it worse. Emperor Diocletian, who took power in 284 AD and is credited with temporarily stabilizing the empire, tried a different approach. He could not undebase the currency because there was not enough silver left to do it with. So in 301 AD he issued the Edict on Maximum Prices, the most comprehensive attempt at price controls in ancient history. The edict set legal limits on the prices of hundreds of goods and services across the empire, covering everything from grain to haircuts to legal fees to the daily wage for a farm laborer. Violations were punishable by death. Producers withdrew from markets, shortages worsened, and black markets flourished. Instead of restoring stability, the edict further damaged economic trust. This is the predictable outcome of price controls imposed on top of currency debasement. The market price of a good reflects the actual cost of producing it. If you set a legal maximum below that cost, producers stop selling the good at the legal price. They sell it illegally. They hoard it. They stop producing it. The shelf goes empty and the black market fills the gap at the real price. Diocletian's edict made things worse and was quietly abandoned within a few years. Constantine, who took power in 306 AD and is better known for making Christianity the official religion of Rome, made a monetary decision with longer-lasting economic consequences. He introduced a new gold coin called the solidus and extracted gold reserves from Roman citizens by compulsion to supply it. A two-tier monetary system emerged in which the government, the soldiers, and the bureaucrats enjoyed the benefits of a gold standard while the non-governmental portion of the economy continued to struggle with a rapidly inflating fiat currency. The people with access to government pay were living in one economy. Everyone else was living in a different, worse economy. The gap between those two economies grew wider with every decade. Meanwhile, the supply chain consequences of all this were compounding. Rome's long-distance trade network depended on trust in the currency. Merchants in Alexandria or Antioch or Londinium would accept Roman denarii because they trusted that those coins would hold their value and be accepted by the next person in the chain. As the denarius collapsed in silver content, that trust eroded. Merchants in distant provinces started refusing Roman coins. Trade reverted to barter in some regions. Long-distance commerce that had connected the entire empire became shorter and more local. The goods that had once flowed from one end of the Mediterranean to the other stopped flowing as reliably. Supply chains that had moved grain, wine, olive oil, metals, and luxury goods across thousands of miles fragmented into regional loops. The economic integration that had made the Roman Empire work as a coherent unit began to dissolve into disconnected local economies. The roads still existed. The legal framework still nominally applied. But the economic infrastructure that the roads and laws had been built to serve was already breaking down before any barbarian army crossed any border. The military situation in the 4th and 5th centuries compounded everything. Rome increasingly relied on Germanic mercenaries and federated tribes to defend its borders, paying them in the gold that ordinary Romans were being compelled to surrender. The army that had once been the most formidable fighting force in the world and a source of economic extraction through conquest had become the economy's largest expense and increasingly populated by the very people it had historically fought. When Odoacer deposed Romulus Augustulus in 476 AD, he did not overthrow a functioning empire. He stepped into a vacancy that the economic collapse had already created. The Western Roman Empire had already ceased to function as an integrated economic unit. Tax revenue had collapsed. Trade had fragmented. The currency was not trusted. The population of the city of Rome had shrunk from over 1 million at its peak to somewhere between 20,000 and 100,000 by the time the last emperor was deposed. The Eastern Roman Empire, based in Constantinople, survived for another 1,000 years. It survived in part because it maintained better monetary discipline, never allowing the debasement to reach the catastrophic levels the Western economy experienced. The lesson the Eastern half drew from watching the Western half collapse was specific. When you debase the currency to pay for things you cannot otherwise afford, you eventually cannot afford anything because the currency is worthless. The Western Empire learned that lesson too. It just learned it too late to do anything about it. The barbarians did not take Rome. Rome spent itself into a condition where there was nothing left to take. Rise and ruin. Every time.